Hello everyone and welcome to this hot take video. So let's be real, we all have animals to some degree, whether we're dog people, cat people, or other kinds of people, we all have our favorite animals. And in many cases, this leads to domestication of said animals. We all want to have an animal that loves us the same way that we love it, and this usually translates pretty strongly into D&D as well. But in my experience, being able to run pets and fuzzy little creatures and animals and monster companions in D&D can be a challenge. And this isn't even just D&D. We could be talking Pathfinder, we could be talking any other kind of TTRPG, so just keep this advice and these problems in mind. I'm going to be giving you some of my own tips and tricks on how to make pets work much better in your campaigns. So first of all, I didn't even realize how big of an issue this topic was until I experienced it myself in one of my own games. My players were in this town called Autumnsville for a fall harvest festival, and there they found an animal caretaker / pet vendor selling all different kinds of creatures. Amongst many were pseudo-dragons, and I thought it would be fun to give them to my players so they all got a dragon, and this literally never came up past this point. It was fun for 5 minutes, and then it never came up again throughout the entire campaign. And there were a number of reasons for this, but the two biggest issues was that we just didn't have the time and the dragons just weren't relevant. The game was only supposed to be so many sessions, so downtime and even, training and caretaking for the pets wasn't really much of an option for the players within the game. And now going back to the point I mentioned before about the dragons not being relevant, they were not relevant at all to the plot. Having the players get pets did absolutely nothing to advance the story forward. It didn't advance the world building, didn't advance the plot, didn't advance RP, it did nothing, and this is a big critique on my part. And funny enough though, despite the transgression that I have made within this, within the literal same session, we actually got to see in this case my party got to see how this is done right, or at least a little bit better. So as I was mentioning, in the same session, the party adopts a very large wild pig named Big Emperor. And as I mentioned before, during the festival they were running around in, there were plenty of games and events, and one of them was hog wrangling. The town was planning to release Big Emperor into the fray as something akin to a finale to the game for anyone brave enough to try and wrestle the massive pig. However, things got out of hand, and Big Emperor soon became much more of a threat to the town than the administrators of the games would have really wanted. So in order to quell some of the chaos, my girlfriend's tiefling rogue found some help and was temporarily polymorphed into a large pig, and then the two pigs just started talking about pig stuff. And not only did I give a performance so moving it stopped my girlfriend from eating any sort of pig product for the next 2 months, but it also gave the party their next heading to advance the story. This game was very themed around the Fae, and the Feywild was a massive part of this campaign. And Big Emperor was revealed to be from the Feywild and to be one of the creatures that stumbled through a rift to get to the material plane. And now, for some of you who may or may not know about, some of the mythos and lore of the Feywild, things can get kind of weird there. Plants and animals can grow in weird shapes and sizes. They can be intelligent. They can be a little more angry. You really don't actually know what you're going to find in the Feywild until you actually find it. And in this case, what my players found within the game is a very large, but also very lovable pig. And due to the fact that my party chose to interact with this creature and not go the murder hobo route, not only did they end up adopting him, but they also got valuable clues, a mount, and a guide in how to get to the Feywild, thus advancing the plot forward. And this point here is really where I want to summarize this. If you're going to put pets, or just any NPCs in your game, make sure they have some sort of important purpose, whether that's inviting RP, deepening world building, or advancing the plot. And of course, too, if you're just doing this to have your players have some fun, that is a perfectly valid reason to have any sort of NPC within the game. I know before I was knocking myself for including the pseudo-dragons in the game, and it was fun for 5 minutes. And honestly, a lot of the times that's all it really takes to be worth it. But just know that sometimes the needs of what you're going to be doing as a DM changes, and sometimes you might need to try to funnel that desire for fun into other areas, especially too if you're on a bit of a time crunch for sessions, kind of like I was for this game. But even too, taking some of the above advice, even if you do all this, running pets and just other animal allies in D&D can still be incredibly difficult. And if you still don't believe me, let me show you some classic examples of even some of the best D&D players struggling with this. So, Critical Role. And yes, it's cliche to compare, your campaigns to Critical Role, but hear me out. It's relevant. And also, given the demographic, it's pretty good to assume that this is a topic that at least a majority of people will know what I'm talking about. And now, as I dive down this rabbit hole, just beware of some spoilers if you're not caught up onto Critical Role. So, in Campaign 1, we have Laura Bailey's character, Vexalia. Vex is a Beastmaster Ranger, and the beast that she has in combat is a bear named Trinket. And I love the concept. I love the bond. I love the RP. I love the story behind Vex and Trinket being bonded like this. This, however, doesn't change the fact that this bear is so difficult to transport. And in some ways, it does slow the party and the plot and progression down quite a bit. And now, as older fans of Critical Role might remember, Sam Riegel makes a lot of jabs at Trinket, often saying things like, Trinket is hard to move around, doesn't contribute a lot to fights, and sadly, he's kind of right, which is one of the other reasons why I'm bringing this up. And granted, this is definitely more of a critique on the Beastmaster Ranger subclass as a whole than, party dynamics and whatnot. But also, too, just note, Beastmaster Ranger has actually been revised, so a lot of the issues that I'm saying here have been changed, but the original issue is still one that can be present within your games if you're not careful. But anyways, going back to my previous point. Trinket, this poor bear, gets carted around through everywhere. And in some cases where they decide they just can't take this poor bear, they just leave him behind. And it got so bad that Matt had to give Laura a D&D equivalent of a Pokeball for Vex and Trinket just so she could bring them along at later levels. And so, this aspect of transporting creatures is unfortunately a reoccurring issue we even see in the second campaign with the exact same player, funny enough. So going into Campaign 2, Laura Bailey creates a tiefling cleric named Jester, and pretty early on in the game, she adopts a blink dog and a crimson weasel. And just due to the nature of adventurers coming and going, Not/Veth's family and Jester's mom basically end up adopting the dog because Jester's on the road and she can't really raise the dog herself. And at this point, too, he's a puppy. And it's hard to bring a creature into the game and care for it, especially when you are moving around so much for this. But Jester does end up keeping the weasel because he's a little bit more pocket-sized. And this weasel goes through absolute hell. Drowned, burned, electrocuted, crushed, acided, whatever damage you imagine a D&D player would take, Sprinkles, this little weasel, has been there, hanging out in Jester's hood, getting absolutely bodied with her. The party, much like the Trinket scenario, would also make a few jabs at Sprinkles, saying that he's being mistreated, got one foot in the grave already, or is just being weakened at Bernie's at this point. And in these cases, too, they're pretty much right. A normal, probably 1 HP creature like this should be dead. But later on in the story, we learn that Sprinkle isn't actually a weasel. Whether or not Matt decided to do this after he realized the inherent problems of having one of his players bring a CR0 creature along with them for all of their high-level adventures, is that things can get squashed pretty easy. So his solution/reasoning/possible excuse for why this poor weasel was somehow managing to survive this entire time was because it was Jester's god in disguise the entire time, claiming that this way the traveler can keep an eye on her, and it sort of made Sprinkle like one of his avatars? And so just with these two examples, it goes to show you that transporting creatures can be very difficult, especially if they don't grow with the party over time. And if the party's aiming to tackle a lot of epic high-level fantasy shenanigans, that creature might not last the entire game. And now that I've gone over some of the transgressions of this issue, this is where I'd like to show you a good example of how this was done better in Campaigns 2 and 3. So in Campaign 3, we got Fern Calloway and Mister. Fern is a satyr Circle of Wildfire druid, and her wildfire spirit is a monkey-shaped elemental named Mister. And now, Mister is nothing more than a mechanic, but through RP we get so much more. He's a reliable ally to the party. You don't have to worry about how he's going to be transported either, and he also has the ability to grow and become stronger as Fern does. And now for my Campaign 2 example, we have Caleb Widogast and Frumpkin. Caleb is a human transmutation wizard, and Frumpkin is his familiar brought about by the Find Familiar spell. And first of all, the Find Familiar is an amazing spell. You have tons of utility as well as easy access to basically pets. I had the spell on my first wizard. I loved it. I had a barn owl as my familiar, and I named him Titus. And even as we progressed throughout the game, Titus never stopped being useful, and much like Frumpkin, in the Find Familiar spell as a whole. You can give your familiar different forms when you cast the ritual, and you can easily bamf them into or out of existence as well, once again making them incredibly easy for transport and not getting bodied. And now, something to combining all of these different elements, we're actually going to step a bit away from D&D here, and this is something that applies more so universally. In case any of you DMs out there wanted to give your players the opportunity to have a pet, but wanted to homebrew in some things to make it more flexible than you just get it from a spell or class feature, or even just writers trying to figure out and justify how magical creatures would survive alongside your colorful cast of characters, may I introduce to you the Owl House. And yes, part of this is because I just finished the show, and it was amazing. I love the characters, world building, story, everything. And in regards to this video, I find that the aspect of the palisman is something very relevant. So within the show and the lore, palismen are magical creatures carved from palistrum wood and often act as witches' familiars in the Boiling Isles. Even the name is great, palisman being a portmanteau between pal and talisman. And now portmanteau is a sort of word that is combined from two different words. So in this case, pal and talisman combined create palisman. Palismen help a witch focus their power by transforming into a staff, as well as even helping them fly around the Boiling Isles. But despite this, they're still seen as members of the family, as pets and friends to the witch they serve, some of them even capable of living for hundreds if not thousands of years. And for me, this example perfectly checks off all of my boxes, by having a pet that can be easily carried with you on your adventures. And previously we talked about mechanically how we can make this easier within the rules and within certain class and subclass mechanics, but we didn't talk a whole lot about homebrewing. And while you can use existing material as templates for your own homebrew, by creating more of an item focus with this, is it allows more members of the party to be able to take this and once again deepen this experience to the entire crew. And so for me, this perfectly checks off all of my boxes. Easy to transport, care for, deepens the world building, and can even lead to some awesome RP and even plot development too. And now, as we're winding through the end of the video, I hope that this gave you some really fun ideas into how you can better run pets and animals into your own game. And also too, if you haven't seen the Owl House, do it. It's a great show. I loved it, and I really do think that you're going to love it too. And also to expect some more Owl House content, at least just Owl House commentary, with maybe some more art on the channel as well. Maybe not too much, but just enough. And that is all the time that I have for this video. And in the meantime, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.